The next session is called as the Artistic Language of Science, and it is my pleasure to start introducing the panelists for this discussion. The first panelist for this discussion is Dr. Jahnavi Phalkey. Dr. Jahnavi Phalkey is the founding director of Science Gallery, Bengaluru. She is also a filmmaker and historian of science and technology. In 2023, Dr. Phalkey was awarded the Infosys Prize in Humanities for her brilliant insights. She was an external curator for the Science Museum in London. She also read civics and politics at the University of Bombay and the School of Oriental and African Studies, London. She holds a doctoral degree in history of science and technology from the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. Please welcome her. The next panelist I ask Sharmila to introduce.
So the next panelist is Shubhashree Desikan. Shubhashree Desikan is a science journalist based in Chennai. After getting her PhD in theoretical condensed matter physics from the Institute of Mathematical Science, Chennai, and postdoctoral research in Harishchandra Research Institute, Allahabad, and IIT Kanpur, she worked as a lecturer with BITS Pilani, copy editor and publisher editor with the university's press. She found the career of her choice in science journalism with The Hindu, where she worked for 10 years. She is interested in literature and poetry and has translated 2 novels from the Tamil to English. She teaches an elective on science journalism at the Ancient College of Journalism, Chennai. She was presented with the National Award for Science Communication in Print by the Department of Science and Technology in 2017. Thank you.
I'm a historian of science by training, and today what I run is a public space. It's what I like to call a new kind of public space for knowledge, where different kinds of languages intermingle. And so the language here is both in terms of metaphorical, because languages of knowing are different, right? The language of science has become very different. Some would like to believe it's only math. It's not true. And then there is also the language of the rest of the world, including art and culture. And what does it mean to bring these 2 worlds together? We are also a bilingual space, so everything we do is in English and Kannada because we are based in Karnataka. Once we have more funding, we'll extend our Indian language reach first to Hindi because it's the largest belt, and perhaps it's easy to say it here, perhaps most needed, to take what we are doing there, followed by then other southern Indian languages, so on and so forth. So, without much further ado, let me now start about talking to you about the gallery. I'll give you first sort of brief facts, and then I will dwell on 3 points as to what is the thing we are trying to do. So in the first incident, I think I'm very happy to be in conversation with Shubhashree, who I first met more than 10 years ago. In fact, at the Hindu, where Paneer was also the reader's editor at that point of time. So this is a conversation that has been happening for a long time. Shubhashree, in fact, saw the first rough cut of my film and gave me comments on it. So here we are. So it's good to be in conversation with her also, because what we're trying to do is not science communication. And science communication is very essential, but there's also something else that needs to be done. And very briefly put, because this will allow you to frame what I'm speaking about, if science communication is about taking research into the public domain, public engagement is not about taking the knowledge into the public domain, but establishing the relevance of that knowledge in the public domain. So what we are is, we are not communicating science, but we're communicating about science. So we're speaking about why this matters in everyday life. So so if you come to like a normal program at the Science Gallery, let's say we are talking about quantum, our goal is to not help you understand quantum, but our goal is to help you understand why quantum matters in your everyday life. Where is it that you are forced to take decisions of certain kinds because of what's happening in the laboratory? So that's the critical work that the gallery does. So we are firmly and squarely a cultural institution that looks at science from the viewpoint of the public. And what I mean by the public, and that's the last thing I'll say extempore, is that we are all the public. And I don't say this merely rhetorically. What I mean to say is that A biologist is as much of a public to a quantum physicist as a quantum physicist is to a carpenter, as a carpenter is to an accountant, as an accountant is to a cook, so on and so forth. So all of us know something. It may not be the thing that someone else is trying to tell us at that point of time, but we come from a place where we know how to know. And so what we need to capture when we engage each other is how do people know, and then connect there and share. This is what I know, that is what you know. Let's share it. Let's find in that conversation the way to imagine a better future. And why? And as mushy as it sounds, it's actually quite essential, because just yesterday I was on a panel where just before me, the usual two tech bros were talking about AI. And what has happened today is that technology has reordered society in very, very different ways. So engineering sciences and science and technology have reorganized our life in terms of what are the choices we are able to make. And that conversation is led by a particular kind of energy of competition, of technology, of capital. And in that conversation, there is very little space to speak about the kinds of things, for example, that you were speaking in the earlier panel. And the making of a cultural space or a conversation about what kind of life we like to lead should not always be coming from a place of dissent. Dissent is required, but dissent should give way to something. We have to reorganize and reorder the conversation on technology and on science, because today it is so ubiquitous. Everything from electoral behavior to medical technologies to consumption is organized by what's happening in the laboratory. And so if that has to be rethought, then we need to have what I call a cultural conversation on science. So we have a professional conversation on science. In fact, it's getting highly professionalized, and if I may say so, highly masculinized, and that needs to change. So though these are among the things where the gallery finds its space. So quickly now, a few facts before I go to the three problems we are trying to solve. We're a part of an international network of galleries. Today we are 4 of us across the world. Melbourne, Mexico, India, and the United Kingdom. 3 of those labs are owned by and on university campuses. India is an exception, because how could we not do it differently? We don't have a university campus on which we could place an interdisciplinary organization, because we hardly have universities. We have some state universities, but largely we have institutions of higher learning. So, and that sort of organization affects how you can place a gallery. So anyway, so this is how it ended up becoming. The government of Karnataka is our founding partner, and we work with these 3 academic institutions. So just so you know the sort of facts about it as well. And I've included some other facts which may not necessarily sound like they're needed, but if you have to set up institutions, as Anita will tell you, like a place like this, in order for a cultural institution to run and thrive, there are other things that we don't like that we have to do, and we have to keep note of. So those are the other languages we need to learn how to speak. The language of accounting, the language of bureaucracy, the language of fundraising, the language of, all of those things which don't sound very nice. So, can you guess where this picture is from? Or what does this picture tell you? No? This one? Yeah. So these two, this is the Natural History Museum in London, and this is from the Indian Museum in Calcutta. So this, allow me to share with you what is the first problem in a way that the Science Gallery is trying to solve. So if you remember, some of you will remember, some of you are old enough to remember, some of you might have seen, natural history museums are places of collections, right? They have fossils, they have, botanical drawings, they have a range of, they have rocks, they have herbaria, they have lots of things, right? And so museums, when they started out, so some of you will know, and this is for the younger people in the room, so for the senior people, this will be slightly boring. Museums grew out of the collections of aristocrats and monarchs who sponsored explorations across the globe, right? And at some point they used to be called the cabinets of curiosities or the Wunderkammer. And at some point they were taken into the public domain, which led to the establishment of museums as public spaces holding knowledge. Now in this space, what is curious about this space? The curious thing about this space was the thing that was being studied, the people who were studying it, and the public came into the same space. So the public knew what was being studied and who was studying it. They had an understanding, they had even if tenuous, a relationship to it. Today, we don't have that relationship. Today, the Natural History Museums still continue to do research, but we barely know what's happening otherwise in the larger, expansive thing that science has become. We've come a very long way from the Natural History Museum as a public space for knowledge to museums today as a public space for knowledge, which are largely of historical narratives. If you see science centers, they are didactic centers. So they came after. In fact, there's a very interesting story about how science centers, in a way, grew as a format. At the crux of it is Frank Oppenheimer. I'm sure many of you have by now seen Oppenheimer, the film. The younger brother. So the younger brother was a cosmic ray physicist. And as his brother got caught in the McCarthy era and being pulled up for having left-like leanings, both of them got caught in the sort of anti-red wave, so to speak, or the McCarthy era. The House of Un-American Activities is what it was called. Frank Oppenheimer lost his job, together with another colleague of his who's also interesting for India. But anyway, now Frank Oppenheimer used to teach at Princeton, and when he lost his job, in fact, he was supposed to come to the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research as a professor of cosmic ray physics. He was offered the job by the then director, Homi Jahangir Bhabha. And his colleague, who was also supposed to, so they were both supposed to come to India. His colleague was earlier a German citizen who was naturalized, and so he lost his passport, so he came to India. In Frank Oppenheimer's case, they expounded his passport, which meant he couldn't travel. So all you find in the archive is a little letter to Bhabha saying, they've taken away my passport. I can't anymore. It's a very tragic little 2 lines that he wrote to him. But what ended up happening as a result of him not being able to travel, in fact, to India, is that he set up the Exploratorium just outside of San Francisco. And the Exploratorium became the cookie cutter model. They also have these things called cookbooks. So there are 3 volumes of these cookbooks to set up science centers which have experiments which allow you to understand concepts in science. So science centers then flourished, following from the Exploratorium as a model, using those cookbooks globally. India, in fact, has the highest concentration of science centers today. And those places then made, in a way, science ahistorical, apolitical, and removed, in a way, from society as ideas floating in space, right? So you learnt about gravity, but it didn't matter that, Newton was also the person who ran the Royal Mint, for example. So you removed ideas from context and it became about science. So that's how science centers grew. And today we are at a point where science centers are the norm. There are science museums which tell history. There are science centers which allow you to understand concepts. But there are no spaces that bring it together in order for you to understand knowledge in context. What is the context in which we are producing and consuming knowledge? And that's the kind of work we would like to do in the gallery. So the first problem, so to speak, is there value in reconstituting or remaking a new reconstituting a relationship between the public and what is being studied and who is studying it? And if so, how can we do it today, given the changed nature of science and the changed nature of public spaces? So that's the first problem we are trying to solve. Now the second problem we are trying to solve is, so this is probably a difficult picture to guess, but this might not be. Here you know who it is, no? You can see, the only person with the face in a way. So I like this picture. I always use this picture of C.V. Raman. One, because he was highly resistant to allowing women into his laboratory. So, what better picture to have for him than to be surrounded by a sea of young women who hopefully have overwhelmed him by now. So this is C.V. Raman. This is Faraday, Michael Faraday. I have this picture here because both Michael Faraday and C.V. Raman and many others at the turn of the last century did their science in public spaces. So the Royal Institution and the Indian Association for Cultivation of Science were places where anyone with an idea that they wanted to pursue could go pay a small bench fee and do the research. I'm sure some of you will already know, given that, Madras University has produced 2 Nobel laureates, Raman and Chandrasekhar, that C.V. Raman, for the first 10 years of his professional life, was an accountant. He was a bureaucrat. And in the evening and early morning, who knows how he had that much energy, he went and did this research at this public laboratory. Today, we do not have any such space. Again, given the nature of changing inquiry and the kind of equipment and things that are required, but it's also because we have institutionalized, and we call it professionalized, but we basically institutionalized science to the extent where it now is behind walls and behind boundaries. So someone who has an idea that they want to pursue, up to a point when maybe it can be taken to a specialized lab, has no space to go. So if you're an accountant today, for example, and a bright accountant like Raman, there's nowhere to go. You will not be able to pursue that idea because you have to be admitted to IISc or to the Indian Institute of Science or to IIT Madras or to this lab or to that lab, for which there is one ridiculous exam, and on that day in the exam, if you don't do well, then you have no career in science. And once you don't have a career in science, those doors are closed to you. Never mind that you're passionate about an idea, never mind that you actually feel for something, never mind that you actually want to find something. We have created institutions that has in many ways created, I'm getting very poetic, I guess this is a language fest, I'm allowed to do this. We have imprisoned both the person who's outside and science itself. It doesn't any longer belong, or we are no longer able to do it because it is inaccessible to us as a public who doesn't have access to it, and it is so the knowledge is imprisoned, and so are people outside of it. So this wall is an impenetrable one. So my question then, the second problem to solve with the gallery is there value in creating a space where people can work with an idea, where they're given the resources and the mentorship and the labs to work with an idea up to a point where then they can take it to a specialized place because it's of value, right? And so that's the second question or the second problem that we are trying to solve. Now the third, which is one of, as I started out saying, cultural conversation about science. In India, we often talk about science in terms of entirely about profession. So if one of the layers is the conversation which is about the, largely the tech bros, and since I live in Bangalore, there's way too many of them, about ranks, about exams, about percentages, about university rank, personal rank, admission, etc., etc., etc. And there is no cultural conversation about it. What are the consequences of studying this? What are the consequences of doing research in that? Do we want, or for example, do women want a particular kind of clinical medical research to be conducted? Because, as we know, the norm for medical research or clinical research is the male human body. And in fact, the white male body. So on and so forth. So is there a cultural conversation about science? And if that is a civic responsibility, how does one create it? So this is an image that I have of an incomplete Indian Institute of Science, because at its inception, it was to be a university like the Johns Hopkins University in the United States. That was supposed to be the model, with law, engineering, humanities, sciences, engineering, what have you, all fields of knowledge. What do we have? Largely engineering, some amount of basic science. Now there's a medical school. Humanities, what is that? Right? I mean, our education system is scarily organized because civil engineers have never spoken during their training to architects, as a result of which architects design buildings as if, structural loading wasn't a concern. And structural loading people think about buildings as if it comes from a place of pain. They as if functionality and human sort of, circulation was not a problem. Because when you're between 17 and 25, when you're forming your ideas about the frameworks with which you approach what engineering is, or what architecture is, or what sociology is, or political science is, you're not talking to anybody who's not a part of your profession. Because you're separated out into campuses, don't have interdisciplinary education. If you take physics, at least when I was growing up, now things are much better. If you are taking physics, you can't take biology. If you're taking biology, you can't take geography. So it's an incomplete education that we get. Except there was a time, and that wasn't too long ago, when art especially was a part of in fact, was part of knowledge. Art was knowledge. And this is, I've just used a jackfruit not only because I love jackfruits and that we're in Chennai, but that being able to draw something accurately was a demonstration of your ability to know something properly. And therefore, art was knowledge. Art was a description of nature. Art was a description which was science. So art was science, right? And this is not too long ago. And we've come very, very far away from that, where we have created disciplines, we have siloed, we have narrowed down to the point where we've lost the big picture. There is, of course, value in knowing things extremely well and knowing things deeper and better. But losing sight of the big picture means that we find ourselves at the threshold of concerns like climate change, like artificial intelligence and its now increasing presence in society, or new gene technologies that are showing up in our hospitals, but we don't have the tools or the imagination to place them properly or to take a decision on them. So is there value in placing science back into cultural conversation, bringing science back into the big picture of culture? And that's the third problem that we're trying to solve, or that's the third question we are asking ourselves as we we have set up the gallery. So the stars of the constellation that's guiding our work is science, meaning the human, the social, and the natural sciences; culture, because art is too constricting a term. If someone who doesn't easily have access to a lab because they're not institutionalized themselves is going to be equally worried about walking into an art gallery, and you can speak to what's happening in largely, or where art is placed in the larger landscape with politics, with global markets, and they are not the self-same thing, but they are embedded in processes that leave many people out. And so culture becomes a wider idea. It's a highly contentious word to use today. I use it still with awareness and hope to not be misunderstood. And experiment. And experiment is the dynamism, because this kind of an institution is an experiment, and like experiments it can fail, it might succeed. So what do we have? Quickly, this is how we are doing things. So this in the center, that is common to the other galleries that we have. So they are in universities, and we all have what's in the center. What's to the left and right of it is unique to us. So we pioneered the public lab complex, which is based on the idea that people should be able to develop good ideas with depth in actual experimental work. And then community spaces, to have people like yourselves come and do the music, use the space for what it is. Build your own guitars, build your whatever, who knows, or something else. Because if we were to tell, then it wouldn't be an agenda, right? So community space is all about getting people in to work out their own agenda, which might not necessarily belong in the lab. So in many ways, we call ourselves a two-way bridge between research and the public. So making pathways for research to find its meaning in the public domain, but also for the public to articulate their expectations and concerns about science. So we've done 6 exhibitions so far. These things you'll find on our website. I won't waste your time with it. Mentorship is very important to us. So we work largely with the age group of 15 to 30. And for anything that is serious, 18 to 28, 18 to 30, because people below 18 are legal minors, and legal minors are a major problem. You have to really take care of them. And yeah, I'm scared of little people. So these are our exhibitions. So the first 2 were physical, the next 3 were digital, thanks to the pandemic. With Carbon, we opened our new premises. So it's a new purpose-built building, and some of you have seen it, or very, very few of you have seen it. I'm hoping any of you who visit Bangalore, please do come and visit the building. Just a few pictures to give you a sense of, the exhibitions we've had so far. I don't want to spend time discussing any of the exhibits, but this is about bringing then artists who think about knowledge and scientists who think about culture together in one single space. This was about bringing dehydrated shrimp back to life. This is our main foyer, so there are some pictures. I just wanted you to get a sense and feel for the space. These are called energy slave tokens. It tells you how much petrol we burn for every hour, and the equivalent of petrol to every hour of human labor. This is about the assumptions of what is contained in the human body. This is the Chladni plate in our most recent exhibition. We also have, right now we have these drums because we have Raman's tabla. So Raman's first research was on acoustics. So we have the tabla, and people come and beat it. Thankfully, I don't have to sit in that room. This is old projector from the planetarium. Yeah. This is the outer building. This is our building as well. This is our lab complex, just to give you a sense of what kind of labs we have. It should be called Nature Lab. Natural Sciences was an older word we used. So needless to say, to put an institution like this together, we have lots of patrons which have made this possible. So these are the founding patrons. These are some of the people who've come in and funded our labs. These are the partners we work with, international partners. So every exhibition we try to find a cultural institution and a research institution to partner with, both in India and abroad, because it just wouldn't kind of work without it. So now it's you and me, and then, yeah, take it from there. Thank you for your attention.
Welcome to everyone, and so thanks Anita for inviting me for this wonderful opportunity to talk to Jahnavi, whom I admire so greatly for so many years. And so அறிவை வந்து பேசும்போது நம்மளை 2000 வருஷம் முன்னாடி திருக்குறள் ஏஜுக்கு கொண்டு போனார். நான் வந்து உங்களை 6000 வருஷம் பின்னாடி கொண்டு போகிறேன். 6000 years ago there was a supernova that was recorded in the caves of Kashmir. That was discovered in 2013 only. So this was an ancient connection between art and science that really takes us back in time. There were many such connections. The Chidambaram Nataraja idol is supposed to be a representation of Orion. You must be knowing all this. I'm just...
No. You're the physicist.
So there was a supernova in 1054 AD. This was apparently recorded, and the Natarajaruடைய சிலைக்கு சுற்றி ஒரு ஃபயர் ரிங் மாதிரி இருக்கும். And the ring of fire is supposed to be representing the supernova. And if you superpose the constellation of Orion, where the supernova happened, supernova is an explosion of a star that really outshines everything in the vicinity. And now it's better, I think. So this is these are all ancient examples of how science, ancient and not so ancient examples of how science and art merged. Leonardo da Vinci, we know famously, was the first person to draw the flying machine design and so on. But since then, where have we come? I think even Jahnavi spoke about the need, the differentiation that's happened between science and art, and how we have diverged in all these years. So we'd like to talk about all these things, and who better than with Jahnavi, who is, as you would have heard in the introduction, she's written several books on science, and then she's made a film on the Cyclotron. That was one of the important centers in Calcutta, a hub of science at that time. And then now, of course, she's the director of the Science Gallery, where lots of important things are happening. We'll talk about all this. So Jahnavi, over to you. You've worked in all these different media, writing, and so in which is your most favorite medium?
Talking, I think. I love to talk. And it's much easier than trying to write or make a film. I hate writing, but I love it when I have written something, and I love the outcome of writing, but I hate the process. I find it extremely hard to start writing. Filmmaking, I thought would be easier, and only fools rush in, as they say. So I thought about filmmaking also like a historian, like a writer. So I went and collected lots of words and came back. No B-roll, no whatever, which is why then I ended up using lots of archival footage and archival images to make up for what I didn't film. So imperfect in every which way, but I think if you ask me how I'd like to work, and this is something over the last, the 7 exhibitions that we've done, the one thing I recognize now, which I didn't before, is that in a way, one can use the medium one is most comfortable with. But I think depending on what it is you want to do with it, unless you're incredibly good at one medium and you decide to stick to it, often the purpose dictates the form. Right? Like, so I could have, for example, written an academic paper about the world's oldest functional cyclotron. And probably about 5 people would read it, right? 2 of which would be reviewers, 2 would be my students who I would force them to read, and 1 would be my husband. So if I didn't want that to be the case, then making a film was the next best thing I could do, because it would survive, it would not be temporary, and I could then use the opportunity to tell the story in the voices of the people whose facility I was filming, right? Like, so it also allowed me to, in some ways, retreat from my voice. Obviously, I'm making the choices, so, I can't fool myself and say it's not in my voice. I made the choices, I asked the questions, I framed the story in a way to speak, but I retreated to the extent that I could in order to put together a story in the voices of the people. So to cut a long story short, I think personally, hate writing, love the outcomes of writing, have tried to make a film thinking I could, finally found out it was very hard. But now I can say that depending on your purpose, the form in a way should be chosen with the assumption that you actually have the people who can work in that form and allow you to develop in that way. So right now you could say broadly I'm working with the format of exhibitions and public programming. So we have lectures, film festivals, tutorials, masterclasses, workshops, etc. So all of which are in a way shaped by the purpose we wanted to serve. And but I'll come back and close at saying that yes, still talking I think is the easiest. It costs nothing.
Which you do very well, yes. And so in the gallery itself, you must have encountered a lot of, do you have your hand in all the design and everything, or as director do you keep off and let people do things their way?
So, no, I'm a very interfering director. While the institution is young, I think it's very important to establish robustly the purpose and the nature of the messaging, is what I tell myself. As a result of which, I do work very closely with the designers, with the also the artists and scholars who are exhibiting. But so again, it's not like I'm doing all of it. My team does a lot, and then we sort of collectively discuss what the outcome is, what is the outcome we want, is this exhibition representing everything we want, is that in it, etc. So there's a lot of discussion involved. So we don't have single curator exhibitions in that sense. It's a collective decision. We have academic advisors, we have curatorial advisors, and then my team. So we do those things together, but the reason why I said I do work very, very closely with them is that at the end of the day, I have to be honest and say I do retain the veto power, right? Because there are times when you have to say, for example, that this might not work, or that we don't want to be saying this at this moment, right? So I do retain that kind of oversight on it, but the detail, of course, I can't design to save my life. I mean, and also, I shouldn't have to. It's an institution. We have professionals who are able to do those things properly, but we work very closely, very, very closely. Yeah.
When you talk about today's topic is the artistic language of science. Yeah. So, did you, when you were in any of these media, when you were working, whether it is in the exhibit, in the gallery, or in the movies, or in the book writing task, did you ever come across a situation where you had you were uncomfortable about saying something openly, and you had to use language to bridge this gap? And
all the time.
Yeah.
Now all the time. Yeah. I mean, especially, well, all the time is a bit of an exaggeration, but no, it's not an exaggeration. So we and I particularly am watchful all the time. But that doesn't mean that every single exhibit needs that kind of caution, right? But you do have to be attentive right now. I mean, I think across the world we are in a situation where political dialogue is fragile, economic dialogue is fragile. You can't sort of go all guns blazing because it's going to be counterproductive. We are in it, whatever it is, the 21st century version of it. And so I think the way I look at my job and the job of the institution is to keep the ground warm so that when change eventually comes, we are not a hollowed out institution, right? So that's the responsibility I think we hold. I think all cultural institutions hold that responsibility now. So we are careful. We are careful because you also want to be responsible about what you are sharing. Like for example, let's take a less contentious example like that of climate change. In the US, of course, right now it's highly contentious, but here it's less contentious. At least to be speaking about it, what to do about it might, is a different ball game altogether. It's to say that, I'll give you an example, a very specific example from my exhibition on water. So my learning from that exhibition was that in terms of freshwater use on the planet, about 70% of it, close to 70% of it goes into agriculture, largely industrial agriculture. About 20% of it goes into industry, and 8% into domestic use, and then some other uses, right? So when you're telling people about water and how one needs to be careful and caring and make an impact on freshwater use, frankly, if you are sitting in a small room and, hopefully this will stay in the small room, is that, what impact are you going to make by, closing the tap when you brush your teeth and, having a shower that's not 100 liters but 20 liters or things like that. I think the place where you need to make impact is industrial agriculture and then industry, right? But that is not well within the reach of an individual citizen. So it's not action that an individual can take, in which case what are we telling as a public space to the young person or to the people walking into the public space saying, oh, we need to be careful about water, except that person's not taking the decisions, right? I mean, unless they are, of course, actually an industrial agriculturist running a large, food processing unit or a biofuel processing unit or who knows what else, right? And so I think that is where that sense of responsibility comes in, where you then you take 5 steps back and you take the object of inquiry seriously in order to educate ourselves and to help our audience find their own learning in that space, to say that where is it that change needs to happen. I think identifying that in itself is the first step. And then what is my role, right? Like, do I have to change my voting behavior? Do I have to change public opinion? Do I have to write about this? Who do I have to speak about? What do I do in my classroom? What do I do with my friends, right? But I think this sort of lack of clarity on what the messaging is expensive for us as a society, and as a cultural institution it renders us particularly useless if we are just saying, oh, we need to use water carefully and this is an exhibition about water. So, and I mean, it was a fairly detailed exhibition which, where we didn't do pedagogy. We had to just again give you an example, and that's what we mean by bringing cultural practitioners and knowledge makers together. So we had and again this will also tell you why I'm going to talk about an example from the United States and not from India, and why that person was able to do that exhibit and why we are not able to do that exhibit. So, and this is nothing to do with politics or anything. It has to do with the fact that we simply don't do that kind of research, and we don't have that kind of infrastructure or those kinds of priorities. So this person works in a department of, it's a cross between geology, social sciences, etc. There's a bunch of, let's call them scholars, working on the levels of pollution, of heavy metal pollution, not the band heavy metal, it's a kind of heavy metal, but like actual metal, pollution in a river next to a mining area. Okay? So what he did was, so there are people who are monitoring it on literally an hourly basis, right? So this person in our gallery, he put up 4 metal sheets, large metal sheets, like 6 feet by 2 feet. And those metal sheets were hanging in the gallery to represent the metals that were polluting that particular river by the mine being washed into the river. The mine was being closed, as a result of which this is what was happening. And the data that was being collected on an hourly basis was being fed onto the metal sheets to create sound, right? Like, so the data was being transformed into sound. So depending on what time of the day or when you were passing by those plates, you heard a particular kind of sound, and there's a particular, and of course all of them are playing, because even if, like say for example, iron is extremely high at a particular point of time, something else was slightly less, right? So there's a particular harmony, if for lack of a better word, that's playing at that point of time, right? And so what people wanted, okay, what is this? Oh, this is about a river. What is this about a river? Oh, these are the metals. Oh, okay, these are the ones polluting. So you're monitoring on an hourly basis. Oh my God, what's happening with the Kaveri? Right? Now, I know I'm coming from Karnataka and talking about the Kaveri here, but that was not the intention. The intention, I mean, then the young people ask the question, right? Like, so where is the research on our rivers, for example? Are we monitoring data on an hourly basis? Should we be monitoring data on an hourly basis? But so the idea in the gallery is to expose ourselves to through these formats to questions that we should be asking. What is the research on water or on rivers even happening? Should this be changing? Am I the person to actually go and propose a project for my master's thesis or for my PhD thesis to do this? And then, should I be talking only to geologists, or should I actually be talking to other people in order to be able to do this research, right? So that's the kind of work that we do. It's about opening doors, opening conversations on things that matter to us, right? Like how it reorganizes everyday life. So I don't know if I have gone along this, I don't know if I answered your question at all.
No, you have, but I have just one more question to ask you, because we are supposed to wind up in 5 minutes.
Okay.
So, this question is, we've all the time been talking about the nature of language and how language in the sense of language in the generalized sense, how it's modifying your how you engage with the public by using language to your advantage and so on. But science itself if you see it as a language, it is a very beautiful thing in itself. It has its scientists are all the time about the symmetries and the simplicity of the elegance of some equations.
Artists are as well.
So yeah, scientists and artists both. Yes, it's the art of science, right?
Yeah.
So do you have space in your gallery for such things that bring out this aspect of science, the beauty of science? And
yeah, I mean, so the very fact that, we create installations and artworks, commission artworks in order to be able to speak is hopefully a testimony to the fact that we want to bring in other ways of seeing, ways of engaging, and a different language to it as well, right? So for our exhibition on carbon, we had a virtual reality experience because everybody loves it. I have vertigo, so I can't care about it. VR experience to explore the surface of carbon, for example, right? Like, so we had that. But the welcoming mural was done by this artist called Prabhakar Patspute, who comes from a mining family himself, and you'll probably know about him, where he created a surreal mural of what the mining landscape looks like, right? So any discussion on carbon cannot be happening without visibility into what is the language of the people who mine, and what is the language of mining, how are we approaching nature, at the end of the day, see, one of the reasons why we have also the nature lab, right? Like, and to not go too far away from your question about language, is that we have made a specific, so there is a beauty, yes, of course, but there is also a cruelty. There is also, and that is there in art too, in all human enterprise, because we are fundamentally brutal creatures. We sought knowledge of nature in particular ways. We've asked, or nature has yielded answers to questions we are able to ask. Mm-hmm. And that has brought us through a long journey to the threshold where we are, where climate change now completely frames our existence, or the lack of it in a few, centuries. So then, if we are to reform this knowing, what are the questions that we need to ask, right? And that means a complete change of language, because that means a complete change of our approach to nature, and that's why the nature lab, to say what are the new questions we should ask in order to completely reform, completely, slightly exaggerate is not happening before I die, but a beginning has to be made. What is that? What are the nature of those questions we should be asking in order to find knowledge that takes us away from this threshold of destruction, right? And so it's deeply embedded, because the way we talk about nature, mm-hmm. and knowledge may be beautiful, but it is a result of asking questions that have brought us where we are, right? Like that knowledge has brought us to this threshold. So how do we reorganize this? Is something that informs what we would like to do in the labs, but also I think this is a much larger conversation, right? Like the gallery is one tiny little thing, which will do a few things, but I think this is a much larger cultural conversation that needs to happen. What do we want to know? Why do we want to know it?
In fact, as Arivu was also talking about the transformational power of art and politics, and you have also very nicely tied it down to the same thing. And so we'll now open out the stage to a few questions from the audience.
Maybe I will begin with a question. Yours is a truly experimental space. You're having the public labs again. You're having different kinds of experimental of art and science in various sort of permutations and combinations. Did you have, and I know it's a different scenario, I said each science gallery is in a very different context. How did you, two things, so it's sort of two questions. How did you do any kind of a survey or a kind of understanding of what the constituents of the gallery should be to understand the particular region that you are addressing, or gaps? And how did you look at looking at impact? How do you look at that? So just these two, if you could reflect, and then we can.
So I've relied hugely on, surveys. Unfortunately, in India, for example, none of the academies carry out a perceptions of science survey, which all of the academies across the world carry out, to understand how their citizens are thinking about science, about knowledge, about research funding, so on and so forth. So we have very little data to go by. I've had a lot of conversations with people in the city, but also elsewhere across the world. Across the world meaning mainly in Germany, the United Kingdom, and the United States. But also in people within the Indian Institute of Science, National Center for Biological Sciences, so on and so forth. And I drew a lot on history of science, right? And that's my training. And I'm assuming because I was appointed to the position that my board and other stakeholders also see value in the kind of thing I bring to the table. And so it really came from a combination of understanding to a certain extent history of science, understanding to a certain extent cultural institutions, and what kind of functions the history of what public spaces for knowledge have looked like, and what might be the new threshold to, in a way, surpass or go beyond. So that understanding, and finally, just before I moved to take on this project, one of the last courses that I taught, and I used to teach in a university before this, was called Global Crises. And I shaped it for undergraduate students to take across sort of cross-governmental supranational institutions, what are the 2 or 3 immediate crises that everybody sees are going to completely reorder our existence. And at that point of time, two hot wars wasn't on the agenda. And then through those crises, filter down our understanding of, okay, so what is the new kind of knowledge we need? Where is it that reform of knowing or asking new questions is most required? And that's how I think the ideas for the labs came up. So Nature Lab, because, there's no getting away from that. Materials Lab, so materials for the future. New Media Lab, because there's no getting away from the digital and, reorganization of our lives. Food Lab, because again, so fundamental to human existence, our necessity. Everything from food security to any other kinds of experiments. So those are the four. And then a theory lab where I just wanted to leave the space open for things that I didn't understand, right? And I'm sure there will be people, once this gains momentum, who will come and say, what about this? And I'll be like, I didn't know and I don't know. Now you come please take this and, take it further. So that's sort of the broad thinking behind it. And in terms of impact, it's a very hard one. So the basic thing we do, we count the number of people who come through our doors and what they say about us, will they want to come back, the usual. So nothing, no surprises there. But the other thing we're trying to do is, so the mentorship programs, we have different gradations, right? Some are very intensive, where, for example, we have young adults who are with us for 14 months. And we train them upwards of 300 hours. And they are on the exhibition floor to have the conversations with everyone who comes in. And we're trying to get that certified now. So we do that, but then there are also low-touch things like summer schools, masterclasses, workshops, tutorials, lectures, things like that. So those are in many ways our captive audience who we can do longitudinal studies on. So we've right now can't say it's very intense, but we've started that.
So you've begun the longitudinal study.
Well, it would be an exaggeration to call it a longitudinal study, but we started tracking that.
Tracking that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Any
There
other
was a question there.
Yeah, Manas. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
It was fantastic listening to you talking, and I understood when you said that how you liked talking was your major interest. It was very evident in your, the whole dialogue was very. Thanks to Ms. Anita for organizing this, and thanks to you for doing this. And what I don't know whether this is a question, but it's more like guidance. I'm an educator myself. I teach at a school in Bangalore. And what I wanted to say was, with this whole the dialogue that happened, what you spoke about public spaces and then community labs. I practiced ceramics at a community studio at Lalit Kala Academy. And I quite often wonder, how we have community studios for art spaces. And there's a question of, does that exist in sciences, right? Because I am a painter by study. I did my undergrad and postgrad in painting, but then immense curiosity towards ceramics, and then I wanted to do it, but there was no space for me to, do it other than a university space, or would I say a amateurish practice somewhere else. But this Lalit Kala Academy was quite a big opportunity for me, where I could go and practice and learn and quite specialize in that field for over half a decade. And being an educator myself, and I teach 16 to 18-year-olds into, they come across study a wider area of subjects like sciences, we say environmental sciences to physics and mathematics, and there's someone who study also art. So with this, and then they move to a more focused area in university. So they're aimed towards in a particular area. And when you spoke about Sir C.V. Raman and then how his access to a public space helped him to maybe quench his thirst on sciences. So what he
helped him get a Nobel Prize, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think, as an educator, I can instill this to my students, saying, see, you're not just going to
Okay, I'll stop you. I'll stop you right there, because you have to instill nothing in your students. They're curious, they are fabulous, just don't beat it out of them.
Yes.
I think that's the job that schools need to do. Don't beat it out of them. That's what school does, that's what college does. Kids are there are several studies, I'm sure you'll find them. Small people want to put everything in their mouth, they want to touch everything, they're curious about everything. It's we who teach them not to do this, don't do that, that's not safe, this is not good. less boundaries, less control is probably the best thing you can do as an educator in class. But
bring more exposure, that's
yeah.
all I can do.
Well, let them be, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes let them be. I think in India we have too much guidance. In fact, after our first exhibition, so one thing I should say is everything is free. We don't charge anything to the end user, which means my job is harder to raise the money, but that's okay, because why else build an institution, right? Like you can't say we want less barriers to entry and then put barriers to entry. But I like your analogy, because this is then that kind of community space for art. This is the community space for science, yeah. Or knowledge making. And again, human, social, natural sciences, not natural sciences alone.
We have time for one more question. Yeah.
Hi, it was wonderful to look at your, the museum. If I could call it a museum, your space. So, but it reminded me of two such institutions, when things were different in our country. One was this experiment of the regional science centers, which was meant to demystify science and, have these parks where people could go touch, and see physical experiments with physics and all. And CCMB was the closest I could think at that point, which was open to the idea of artistic engagement for a long time, when CCMB was in a different time and space, compared to today. My question is more in terms of looking at these kind of, when India was different. How much of government interference do you deal with? When you engage with questions, just as you said about climate change and having an installation like that, how immune are you to government interference in today's time?
Yeah, so let me first just clarify. See, science centers, like I said in my presentation, right? Like, it's science without context. And what we are trying to do is science with context, right? Like, so in a sense, and we are not setting up science experiments. We are setting up installations, right? So where someone who walks in doesn't feel that this is science. It feels this is about the world in which I live. This is the world in which I make my choices. This is the world in which I make my decisions, right? Like, and that's really the step away from science centers, from science being ahistorical, acontextual, apolitical, to make it all of those things. To come to government, see, we are established by the government of Karnataka, right? Like, so in some ways, I think I'm delighted that the government of Karnataka saw reason to set it up this way. And I'm not saying this because I need to be careful about saying this, but I think the one thing that we need to understand, and this, from my own experience of having taught in a university before this, is that I don't think I would have, for example, taken the plunge to establish this institution if it was a private institution alone, right? It would have to be a public trust, a public society, that kind of a space, because you can't, and again, private trust, private society, I really would not have taken the plunge if it wasn't for the public taxpayer money support, let's put it this way. Because we've seen this in India, that durable institutions do not get built by private donations alone. They either become too precarious, or if they're single donor institutions, then they are largely defined by the ambitions of that person, and why not, right? They've decided to pump their money into something, they want something out of it. One can expect that a Stanford or a Yale, who makes money from, slavery and salt from somewhere here only, close by, builds a Yale University, and, other robber barons build Stanford and whatnot, but that's the United States of America. Here, the only durable institutions that have been built from private philanthropy are the Tata Trusts and the Birla Trusts and foundations, right? Others it's a hit and miss kind of thing, right? Like, Manipal has survived for several years, but those are sort of fee-paying institutions of education. The public aspect of it, right? Like that, it's public. Never mind that our public institutions believe in having, sign up for entry at the gates, and the taxpayer who funds it doesn't, is not allowed to walk into those premises. Those things need to be changed. But I think a durable public institution with purpose that needs to do the work it needs to do, I do think there is no way to do it without, or there isn't a good way to do it without government support. So I'm happy that we have that. And it comes with constraints, and I'm not going to justify those. But what do I mean by constraints? So let me give you an example that I in fact just gave yesterday to a few people, which is that so in the middle decades of the later half of the 20th century, See, after the Second World War, the Europeans and the Americans trained a lot of physicists because somehow physics was the frontier. Nuclear physicists, high energy physicists, particle physicists, too many of them. And at some point, the young ones who actually were attracted to it first found themselves questioning what physics was being put to use for. Because with the space program and with the intensification of the Cold War, the politicization of the lab was complete. And it was a part of the Cold War arms race. So many physicists started dropping out, and others didn't find employment in the manner in which they would like. What happens at that point is the Rockefeller Foundation comes in, steps in, gives money, and the physicists start taking their tools to biology. Bioinformatics and molecular biology is born out of this funding. So the nature of funding will always shape what you're doing, whether it's in the lab or whether it's in a public institution like ours. There is no getting away from that. So the thing is to do it with eyes wide open and to be cautious and to do it the best we can, right? Like, I mean, it's not going to be any other way. I don't see, and it justified or not, yes or no, I mean, frankly, I don't know that it can be any other way, right? Unless I had my own money, in which case I'm the single donor and I'll set it up the way I want. But then what's the point, right? Someone else will not agree with it. So yeah, this is what we work with.
Thank you, Jahnavi, and looking forward to what you promised for that it will spread to other states and other languages too.
Yep, I'd love to see that happen.
Yes.
Love to see that happen.
I just have not a question, just an observation. Talking about this whole issue of art and science, please go and see the remarkable exhibition which is up here at Dakshinachitra, in the big gallery, in the two small galleries
At the Varija
nearby.
Gallery, yeah.
And that is R.M. Palaniappan, who's a very senior artist from Chennai. And his work is remarkably connected to actually the conversation that you have had, based on mathematics, on mapping, on statistical issues, and how he has converted all that kind of inquiry in his own head into a visual medium. It's an incredible exhibition of almost 50 years of his work with a very beautifully produced catalogue. So while you're here and after this conversation, please go and see that exhibition.
The exhibition is on till March 31st, so in case you don't have time today, you can always come back. So with that, a very big thank you to both of you. And I urge all of you to really make a trip to Bangalore and visit the Science Gallery, Bengaluru. It's absolutely a fantastic place. It's worth it. We had a tour before it opened to the public, and I think it's just gotten better. So thank you.